What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Alright guys, so we are basically going to continue our coverage over Secret Invasion. Now remember, when it comes to Secret Invasion, it was basically a storyline that was done back in the early 2000s, matter of fact 2008, where you have Marvel trying to do something new and interesting with the Skrulls, an alien race who has the ability to actually shapeshift. Now that right there is very important. And hence the name Secret Invasion, because what the Skrulls had been doing actually was going around the earth kidnapping people and then replacing those people that they had kidnapped with some Skrulls who had the ability to shapeshift, and those Skrulls would pretend to be the people that they had kidnapped and replaced. And so if you were just a regular dad, mom, husband, whatever, you had no idea if your husband, wife, son, daughter was actually them or an actual Skrull. And so it kind of led to the idea of who can you trust? Now, this far in our coverage over Secret Invasion, we have covered the preludes, we have covered some of the main storyline, but we also cover a lot of tie-ins that are somewhat important to the actual story, Secret Invasion. Now, with that being said, for today's video, we're going to cover Secret Invasion Thor. Now, before we are actually able to jump into today's video, there are some things I do want to talk about when it comes to Thor around this point in Marvel Comics, because honestly, I feel like what I'm about to tell you is going to be somewhat important for you guys to know to help you understand what's actually happening to Thor at this point in Marvel Comics, because this story is 15 years old, guys. Long time ago. Anyways, though, when it came to Thor around this point in Marvel Comics, he just came back to life not too long ago. Let me explain why. Because in the early 2000s, Thor and the rest of Asgardians were basically killed off in an event known as Ragnarok. And of course, they all died in Ragnarok. Now, after a few years, you have Marvel begin the process of bringing Thor and the rest of Asgardians back to life. Now, how they did that, though, was Marvel said once Ragnarok happens and Thor and the rest of Asgardians are killed off, they're actually reborn as regular humans on Earth. But then Thor has the ability to wake those people up and they change forms back into their Asgardian form. And so by this point in Marvel Comics, Thor had basically went around the earth and found all the different Asgardians who were reborn as regular humans, and he used his hammer as a way to bring them back to their regular Asgardian form. Now, on top of that, though, Asgard got moved to Oklahoma, to a small town in Oklahoma known as Broxton, Oklahoma. Now, Asgard kind of floats right above it, but sometimes some books, Broxton kind of is a neighbor city to Asgard. And so Asgard is right now on Earth. Now, everything I just said right there about Thor is going to be very important for this video. But getting into today's video, we actually do pick up in space. Now, we do pick up with some kind of creature or some kind of person right now in pain, because right now that person is on fire, but that person's right now heading towards Earth. And of course, that means they're going to crash very hard on Earth. But the question is right now, who is this person right now heading towards Earth and right now in some kind of serious pain? But then we actually pick up with Thor. Well, really, we actually pick up with Donald Blake. Let me explain. So back in the early days of Marvel Comics, when Odin had basically sent Thor to Earth, Thor used a secret identity known as Donald Blake to kind of hide the idea that he was Thor. On top of that, though, Donald Blake was a doctor in some areas. Now, in the early 2000s, they actually brought this concept back into Marvel Comics, the idea of Thor being Donald Blake, as a way to kind of hide his Thor persona. And so even though Asgard is right next to Broxton, Oklahoma, he does kind of go back to Broxton to kind of make sure the town is okay as being Donald Blake. And so right now we do pick up with Thor, but he's right now Donald Blake, and he's being a doctor right now. where he's trying to see how this lady and her unborn child are actually doing, which we're kind of told good news, like, hey, she's supposed to have a healthy baby. It should come very soon. When it does, he'll be there to kind of help deliver the baby. Now, while he's talking to this lady, well, that is the moment something crashes outside, which of course does send a shockwave through Broxton, Oklahoma, through the house that Thor and this lady was actually in. And so when Thor hears that, he's like, okay, I have to leave, change into Thor to figure out what happened, because it sounded like it hit Asgard. And so he does tell the lady, hey, I have to go because I feel like someone might need some help. Now, right when he's about to leave, that is the moment she tells him, hey, my water just broke. The baby is coming now. Now, Thor is kind of like, okay, I have to get her some kind of help so I can help my people out and then come back here to help deliver the baby for her. And we actually do see Thor tell us that he did have a nurse stay behind with her so that he can go and see what had crashed into Asgard. And so as he walks towards Asgard, we do see him change into his actual Thor persona and fly over to Asgard. Now, once Thor actually arrives to Asgard, he is confronted by his brother, Baldur. Now, Baldur is one of the many different siblings that Thor has. For some strange reason, Marvel forgets that Thor and Loki do have other siblings like Tyr as well and Angela. Either way, though, when it comes to Baldur, he does come to Thor and say, hey, brother, listen, I saw what actually crashed into Asgard. And let me say right now, we should be a tad bit worried. Now, when they go see what had actually crashed into Asgard, they come to find out it was Beta Ray Bill. Now, this is actually very, very important. So let me explain a tad bit about Beta Ray Bill. So Beta Ray Bill actually belongs to an alien race known as Corbinites. But basically, Beta Ray Bill was one of the first few characters, I want to say he was the first character, to actually have the ability to pick up the hammer of Thor. Now, that was very huge back then because honestly, no one else besides Thor or Odin could actually pick up the hammer of Thor. And so when Beta Ray Bill did it, it was kind of like, oh my God, this is huge. And so Odin gave Beta Ray Bill his own hammer called Stormbreaker. And so it kind of gave Beta Ray Bill the ability to kind of rival against Thor. But these two characters, they're like brothers because they're both basically God of Thunders in their own kind of way. Now, with that being said, it's Beta Ray Bill coming to Thor with a warning saying they're coming. And it's kind of like, okay, who's coming? And you have Beta Ray Bill tell Thor the Skrulls are coming to Asgard. They're trying to take over the earth and they don't care if humans survive or live, but they do know one thing though. They don't want any Asgardians left alive at all. Meaning that they're coming here to make sure that we, the Asgardians, are completely wiped out. On top of that, they took my hammer and they're trying to do something big with my hammer. And so right now, it's Beta Ray Bill seriously injured, but also scared to see what's to come to Asgard with the Skrulls on their way here to basically get rid of Asgard and also the Asgardians who live in Asgard. And so after that moment right there, you do have Thor realize that he needs to give some kind of speech as a way to motivate the people of Asgard to get ready to fight against the Skrulls. And which, of course, he does give a very good speech in the way of motivating his people, and they're ready to fight against the Skrulls. Now, after that, you then have Thor go up into the sky. Now, when he does, this is Thor basically using his powers to bring in a bunch of storms that look like tornado storms are about to hit the area. And the reason why, because he's trying to warn the people of Broxton to get somewhere safe. Get into your shelters. Because if the Skrulls are coming to Asgard for one big battle, there is a possibility that Broxton is going to get hit as well. And so you have Thor say, in Oklahoma, usually they get hit by a lot of tornadoes because it is tornado season. And so with that, I'll bring the idea that tornadoes are coming soon, but in reality, they never are coming. And with the idea right there out in the open, it will make the people run to their shelters and get somewhere safe. And of course, it'll protect them from the big battle that me and the Asgardians are about to have with the Skrulls. Now, something else I do want to mention that at this point in Marvel Comics, Loki was actually a woman. And the reason why, because every single time he dies and when he's reborn, he comes back in a different way. And so in this point in Marvel Comics, when he died in Ragnarok but came back to life, he came back as a woman. Now, let's not forget, when it comes to Loki, he or she right now is the Lord of Mischief, meaning that he's always trying to play tricks on people. And so with everybody getting ready for this battle against the Skrulls, you actually have Loki kind of begin a rumor to be spread across Asgard by saying that how do we know the Skrulls are not here right now? Because they have the ability to actually shapeshift, which means that there could be some Asgardians right now who are not actual Asgardians. Instead, they could possibly be, a Skrull. But then kind of brings the idea, what if Beta Ray Bill is also a Skrull? What if the Skrulls had sent Beta Ray Bill down here and pretended it was Beta Ray Bill, but in reality, it was actually a Skrull? And so now you have the Asgardians kind of freaking out, because now the idea that, oh my gosh, there could be Skrulls in Asgard right now, who can we trust? Now, Baldur tries to calm everybody down, but no one is listening. And matter of fact, they want to go into the room where Beta Ray Bill is trying to heal up in right now to see if that he's actually Beta Ray Bill or possibly a Skrull. Now, you do have Thor crash back down to Asgard and say, stop it. Stop it right now, because you guys should know that person there right now is Beta Ray Bill. But if you can't trust me, if you can't trust him, there's a way to actually prove it is Beta Ray Bill. And so what Thor actually does is that he walks into the room where Beta Ray Bill is actually trying to heal up in. Now, of course, he throws his hammer towards Beta Ray Bill. Now, when he does that, this is the ultimate test to prove if Beta Ray Bill is actually a Skrull or not. Because again, if Beta Ray Bill is actually a Skrull, then he's not worthy enough to actually lift the hammer of Thor. And so when Thor throws his hammer towards Beta Ray Bill was able to grab the hammer and show that, one, he's still worthy to lift Thor's hammer, but two, it's actually Beta Ray Bill. It's not a Skrull pretending to be Beta Ray Bill. Now, you then have Baldur, the brother of Thor, realize without the hammer, Thor is not Thor. Thor is right now Donald Blake. But the reason why Thor did that, because he's kind of like, someone has to be there to help the people of Broxton. And so, yes, I may just be Donald Blake with no powers, but at least I can be out there to help people in Broxton while you guys stay here and fight against the Skrulls. Now, for Baldur, he's kind of like, wait a second though. Who's going to lead us against the army of Skrulls? And you have Donald Blake / Thor tell Baldur, you are. Brother, you are the best person to actually lead Asgard against our enemies. And so as Thor leaves, it's Baldur and Beta Ray Bill now getting ready for the big battle against the Skrulls. So as soon as he arrives at the shelter where most of the people of Broxton have gone to, which is a middle school, you have Thor go straight towards her and say, hey, listen, I'm back. I'm here to help out. Let's make sure your baby is delivered without any kind of complications at all. And so they're about to begin the process. But of course, while he is about to begin the process of bringing in her baby, that is the moment the Skrulls have arrived to Asgard, and now Asgardians must get ready to fight against the Skrulls. The war is about to happen now. Now, getting into the second chapter, we can say that basically the war has started between Asgard and, of course, the Skrulls. And so this is going to be one of those big, huge battles that we are going to see, where basically it all comes down on maybe one or possibly two different moves that could help either side actually win the battle. But either way, it's Baldur and Beta Ray Bill right now leading the army of Asgardians against the Skrulls to hopefully protect Asgard, but also Broxton as well. Now, we actually do jump back over to Thor. Now, when we do, we actually do see Thor right now still trying to take care of his patient. Now, while he's actually trying to do that, she doesn't give birth to her child right now, but it's really him kind of getting her ready to give birth to her child very soon. Either way, once they do take a small break, he steps away. He is confronted by the nurse he had left for her earlier when he was out there being Thor, and he had Elise on with her to make sure that everything was a-okay. Well, you do have the nurse coming to Thor, kind of like wondering if he's okay. Now, at first, I thought she was a Skrull because she just appears randomly throughout this story, and you're kind of thinking like, oh my gosh, she's probably a Skrull and she's going to do something to the mother and her child. She's not going to. But what she actually does is that she comes to Thor to see if he is okay. Because with them all being in the shelter right now, and you have everybody in the shelter actually thinking that it is a tornado outside coming very soon, she's kind of like, if this your first time being in a storm like this, don't worry. Most times the storms just pass us by. But in reality, is Thor really more worried about Asgard as the Asgardians fight against the army of Skrulls? Now, that is the moment you do have Thor overhear a conversation. Now, this conversation is really more of a bunch of men right now saying to themselves that they're going to go help put out the fires they see in Asgard, because one of them just had arrived at the shelter and he told everybody else that basically there are a bunch of fires happening right now at Asgard. And because they look at Asgard as their neighbor city, they're kind of like, hey, we got to help them out. There's so many fires there right now, and we're firefighters, so let's go out there and basically help out, which honestly, it is a bad idea. And you do have Donald Blake try to convince them not to go, but in their eyes, people need help. And so they have to help the people who are in need. They are firefighters. And so they do leave to go help the Asgardians with their supposed fire. Now, jumping back over to the battle between the Skrulls and also the Asgardians, while you have the two sides fighting against one another, you do have the Asgardians actually being able to win the battle against the Skrulls. Like right now, as this war goes on, the Asgardians are actually kind of doing some heavy damage to the Skrulls. Now, it's not like the Skrulls are not doing any kind of damage to the Asgardians. It's just that the Asgardians are kind of doing more damage to the Skrulls rather than the Skrulls doing damage to the Asgardians. Now, while you have the two sides fighting against one another, you do have those regular people from Braxton actually with their fire truck trying to put out the flames that are all over Asgard right now at the moment. But while you have them trying to do that, those people, but also Beta Ray Bill, they realize that the Skrulls are about to release something really, really powerful. And when they do, it's really Beta Ray Bill realizing that things just gotten worse for him and the rest of the Asgardians. And that is the moment we come to find out that basically the Skrulls has sent in a Super Skrull. Now, a Super Skrull is basically a Skrull that has the abilities of some other person from Earth. So, for example, this Super Skrull has the combined powers of Tundra, Titania, Volcania, and also Battle Axe as well. And so with those 4 different characters' powers all in one body, it makes this Super Skrull actually a very powerful Super Skrull. Now, this is not the first time we actually seen a Super Skrull have multiple powers of other characters in Marvel Comics, because the original Super Skrull actually appeared back in Fantastic Four comics, and it had the powers of all the Fantastic Four members at that time. So Ben Grimm, Human Torch, Susan Storm, or Susan Richards, and also Reed Richards. Either way, though, with this Super Skrull right here, it's a really powerful threat for the Asgardians to actually go up against. On top of that, though, when it comes to Beta Ray Bill, he realized that they were able to actually clone the hammer he uses, Stormbreaker, and give this Super Skrull a similar version of Stormbreaker to basically use against the Asgardians. Asgardians. Now, you do have Beta Ray Bill try to hold his own against this Super Skrull, but it's going to be an actual challenge for him. Now, while the battle goes on, those men from Broxton who were trying to help Asgard put out their fires, well, they realize they cannot put out the fires because the fires are not your normal kind of fires. And so they're like, okay, you know what? We have to leave. We can't stay here. We can't actually help out at all. Now, we briefly actually go back over to the shelter in Broxton where you do have those firefighters come back and say, yeah, we were basically wrong. We realized that we cannot actually help out at all. So we came back here for shelter. But while they're talking to everybody else about what they saw out there, the big war happening right now in Asgard, you didn't have basically Donald Blake's patient begin to give birth to her child. And so Donald Blake really can't leave her now because her child is about to come into the world. Now, getting back over to Beta Ray Bill, we kind of get this section where it's only 2 pages, but we get this section where you do have Beta Ray Bill trying his best to actually fight against this Super Skrull. But the problem is, though, he's unable to actually do anything to this Super Skrull, to the point where he's trying to make the Super Skrull fall down and give up, but the Super Skrull tells him, no, I'm not going to give up. Matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and continue to beat down on you to have my side win this war between our 2 armies. But then we actually do jump back over to Donald Blake and his patient, where we actually do see him right now be able to help his patient actually give birth to her child. It is a healthy baby. Now, the reason why the story is actually doing this because it's playing around with the idea that every time a baby is born, someone else is dying in the world. And so that baby is actually replacing somebody in the world. Now, with that being said, right now it's kind of like with this baby being born, that means like Beta Ray Bill is about to die. And so after the child is born, the child's name is Faith, and you didn't have the nurse kind of give Donald Blake some congrats on being able to help this child come into this world. You didn't have Donald Blake actually leave. But then we actually jump back over to Beta Ray Bill right now getting his butt kicked by the Super Skrull to the point where we are actually left to believe that he is going to die here. And if he does, this will be a very huge loss for the Asgardians, but also for Thor as well. And by this point in Marvel Comics, Thor has lost so much already. But right when the Super Skrull is actually thinking that, yeah, I'm about to win, I'm going to kill off your best fighter, that is the moment she's actually stopped. And when she stopped, she realized who stopped her. It's Thor. He came back to Asgard and he does tell Beta Ray Bill, don't worry, man, you're not going to die here, but I'm going to make sure that I'm going to end this war. And so you have Thor getting ready to pick up his hammer and become Thor once again to fight against this Super Skrull. And so getting into the final chapter, we actually do pick up with Thor right now, getting ready to beat down on the Super Skrull. Matter of fact, he does beat down on the Super Skrull because the Thor, he's kind of like, listen, I come back here, I see my city is wrecked, I see my people got wrecked, I see my brothers got wrecked. No. It's time for me to go ahead and basically stop you. And so you have Thor go ahead and begin the process of actually fighting against this Super Skrull. And so while the battle's going on, you do have other members of the Asgardians coming in to actually help Thor fight against this Super Skrull. But once they think they have the chance to say, okay, you know what? I think we won. I think we're able to actually say we have defeated the Super Skrull. You then have the Super Skrull say, no, I'm not done yet. You may have seriously injured me, but I do have one more plan up my sleeve. And so what we see is that you actually had a Super Skrull pick up the hammer she was using, Stormbreaker, and begin to spin around in circles. Now, when she does that, of course, it gets faster and faster and faster to the point it does have a lot of energy. And so when she throws it, we know that she's trying to destroy something in the hammer's path. But it's not Thor, it's not Asgard, it's not really anybody on Asgard. She's trying to destroy Broxton, the city as a neighbor to Asgard, where Donald Blake works out of. It's her right now trying to wreck that city with the power of the hammer behind it. And so you have her just throw her hammer in the sky, it goes into space and then comes right back down, and it's about to destroy the entire city. And so you have Thor really having no choice but to go out there and to hopefully meet the hammer head on, and hoping that he's able to actually stop the hammer. And right now, Stormbreaker is holding a lot of energy in that one throw that the Super Skrull have basically did with Stormbreaker. But you didn't have Thor being able to go head on with the hammer and actually stops it. And when he comes back, he has both hammers in his hands. And then he hands one hammer over to Beta Ray Bill. So Beta Ray Bill now has his hammer back. Thor has his hammer, and so does Beta Ray Bill, which means that now we can enter in the final battle. Now, it's not a final battle like you think it would be, like, oh my gosh, this is where they're basically going to go 2-on-1 on this Super Skrull and just beat down on this Super Skrull. But instead, what they actually do is that they tell Asgard to fall on top of them, but also the Super Skrull, to basically crush them along with the Super Skrull. And so it's kind of like we're seeing Beta Ray Bill and also Thor sacrificing themselves to save Asgard, to save Broxton. And so when Asgard actually falls on top of Thor and Beta Ray Bill, we're left to believe that they're actually dead. But we come to find out they didn't die. Not at all. Instead, the Super Skrull got squished, but Thor and Beta Ray Bill are now pushing Asgard back up. And this shows that they are both very powerful, but they also have a lot of trust in one another to make sure that neither one of them had actually died in that moment right there. And really, the story kind of ends on that note right there, where basically you have Thor and Beta Ray Bill and the rest of the Asgardians begin the process of actually helping out Broxton, because there was some damage done in that big battle between the Skrulls and the Asgardians, but also kind of making sure that everybody is okay in Asgard as well, and get rid of the dead bodies of the Skrulls. But then on top of that, it also showing how much trust that Beta Ray Bill and Thor have in one another. How basically they're more than just friends, they're brothers. And so with that being said, this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So with that being said, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, I'll see y'all next time. Later.